Hey everyone, welcome back to the Smoking Sun channel. This story begins on a quiet Memphis street before dawn. A knock on a bedroom door, a bedroom, and a timeline that won't sit still. Also, I've hidden a small Easter egg in this video. Be the first to comment exactly where it is, where it appears, and the precise timestamp down to the second, and I'll pin your comment to the top. Now, let's get started. It was June of 2005 in Memphis, Tennessee, and 39-year-old Jennifer Jackson shared a home with her teenage daughter, Noura. Jennifer worked as a successful bonds broker, and people who knew her described her as hardworking, independent, and very protective of her daughter. On the surface, their lives might have looked pretty normal, but like many households, there were things going on that outsiders didn't always see. Noura wasn't attending a traditional high school. She was homeschooled, but she was behind in her coursework. Jennifer wanted her to catch up, but Noura seemed to focus more of her spending time with her friends than on her schoolwork. In late May, on Memorial Day weekend, Jennifer took Noura to Florida to visit her sister. It was supposed to be a nice trip, but there were moments that hinted at tension. While they were away, Jennifer got a call from her neighbor back in Memphis saying that there was a party going on at her house. At first, Noura told her she didn't know anything about it, and then later admitted she did. After that, the conversation between them was short, and the drive back to Memphis was even shorter on words. There was also a private conversation about money. Jennifer had life insurance and retirement accounts with Noura listed as the beneficiary, and she was handling the property of Noura's late father. Not long before the trip, Jennifer told Noura that if they sold her father's vehicle, the money would be set aside for her college education, and if she didn't go to college, it would be used to pay back the child support her father had owed. It was an idea that Noura didn't agree with. On the evening of June 4th, 2005, Jennifer Jackson headed out with her friend James Toole for a wedding. After the reception, they decided to keep the night going, so they went to a bar called the Cockeyed Camel. They ended up staying out late before eventually going their separate ways. And for Jennifer, that night out would end up being her last. That same night, Noura was off doing her own thing. She put on a yellow tank top and white skirts and gold sandals and headed over to her friend's place. Like a lot of teenagers, she wasn't in one place for long. She bounced around, met up with different people, and eventually ended up at her ex-boyfriend Peter Bradsfield's place. By then, she changed it up a little bit. She was still in a yellow top, but now she had on a denim skirt with black sandals. Her phone stayed busy for most of the night. She called, she texted, she even reached out to Perry again, first calling from outside his house, then sending him a text asking if they can get back together. Now around that same time, another friend, Clark Schifani, got a call from her cell, but strangely, he also got a call from Jennifer Jackson's landline back at the house, even though Jennifer wasn't there. Not long after that, Noura pulled into the BP station to grab a pack of cigarettes, and then her phone went completely silent. For almost 2 hours, nothing. No calls, no texts, just silence. A couple hours later, she was on her phone again. She called a few of her friends, stopped at a Walgreens to grab a few first aid items, and then filled up her Jeep at a gas station. After that, she met up with some friends again before finally heading home. By then, her night was just about over. The following Sunday morning was quiet for most of Memphis, but just before dawn, Jennifer Jackson Street went from still to chaotic. Noura suddenly ran across the road to the Cox house, pounding on the door and begging for help. Rachel Cox quickly dialed 911 while her husband Mayo followed Noura back toward the Jackson home. When Mayo stepped inside, he looked down the hallway toward the bedroom, saw blood, and rushed back for his wife. Together, they went inside again. By then, Rachel had handed the phone to Noura, and she was frantic, trying to explain what she had found. She told the dispatcher her mother wasn't breathing. There was blood everywhere. And when she was asked if her mother had been shot, she told no. Rachel then took the phone from her and continued the call and followed the dispatcher's instructions. She walked down the hallway, found Jennifer in the bedroom lying nude on the floor near the foot of the bed. Within minutes, the first responders arrived. One of the first through the door was Officer Russell Tankersley with the Memphis Police Department. Noura came out to meet him and told him that there was something wrong with her mother and that she was in the back of the house. As Tankersley went inside, he saw the blood in the hallway and blood pooled in the bedroom doorway. Paramedic Michelle Holbert followed right behind them. She found a wicker basket covering Jennifer's head and chest, moved it aside, and checked for signs of life. At 5:18 that morning, she pronounced Jennifer dead. The officers secured the house, holding the scene until the crime scene team and investigators could take over. When the crime scene team arrived, they carefully documented the path from the hallway into the bedroom and began their slow, methodical collection of evidence. They photographed and logged everything: the wicker basket, a wooden footstool, a light switch cover, a silver-colored kitchen knife with a black handle, a golf club, the bed and bedding, and even the white kitchen door. They tried using chemicals to lift the bloody shoe prints, but none of the prints had rich details that could be used for identification. Moving through the kitchen, they documented a small broken pane in the door that led to the garage. The broken glass had fallen inside, scattering across the kitchen floor. The break lined up with the butterfly lock mounted on the inside of the door, a lock that could not be seen or reached from the outside. Every other door and window they checked was locked. Taken together, investigators believed the glass was broken after the door had already been opened, staged to make it look like a break-in. They also paid attention to what the house didn't show. There was blood in the hallway and bedroom, but the place wasn't ransacked, and valuables were still sitting out. Later, her half-brother discovered her wallet in a plastic bin in the sunroom and turned it over to the investigators. Inside were unexpired credit cards and an old work ID. Family and neighbors mentioned that Jennifer sometimes kept a spare key under a flower pot near the front door, but no spare key was ever recovered, and photos showed the pot looked moved. One detail that stood out to the investigators was the hallroom bathroom. The counter and fixtures were wet as if someone had just been there. Later, the medical examiner confirmed Jennifer's cause of death: multiple stab wounds, over 50. She had injuries to her chest, abdomen, back, neck, and arms, and defensive wounds on her hands that showed she had fought back. From the start, the detectives could see there was no true sign of anyone forcing their way inside. The locks weren't damaged, and nothing in the house looked forced. The only break was a small pane of glass on the kitchen door, but it lined up with a lock that couldn't be reached from the outside. To the detectives, it looked staged, a break made after the door was already open. This pushed them to think about people who already had access, or who Jennifer might have let in herself. They started asking questions and talking to Jennifer's friends and family, trying to get a better picture of her life. The people around her described what was going on inside the house and what Jennifer's everyday life looked like. Noura's name came up more than once. People mentioned arguments over friends, curfews, and money. The issues made it clear that there was tension, and they made detectives look at what people were saying in a different light. In her version, Noura said she got home sometime between 4 and 5 a.m. Once she realized what she had walked into, she ran to the neighbors for help, and the 911 call came from their house. But the detectives didn't just take her word for it. They had to see if her story matched the hard evidence. They checked it against receipts and surveillance, and they zeroed in on a receipt from the all-in-one gas station and the store's tapes as reference points. Inside the house, the scene just didn't look right. A couple of drawers were left open, but again, nothing was taken. Jennifer's wallet still had her credit cards inside, and what really stood out were the keys. Her main set was missing altogether, and the spare that neighbors said she sometimes kept under a flower pot by the front door was gone too. When detectives lined everything up, no forced entry, the details from inside the house, and a solid timeline, it cut down the options. Their focus started to settle in one direction. That same morning, the detectives asked Noura to ride with them down to the homicide office. She wasn't under arrest, so they let her ride up front. She even nodded off during the drive. But by the time she gave her statement downtown, the detectives were already thinking beyond what she said, watching for anything they could test against the evidence. The detectives also wanted a closer look at her Jeep, and Noura agreed. Before long, it was pulled in for a full search. Inside, they found a Walgreens bag stuffed with first aid supplies. That led detectives to surveillance footage, showing Noura herself walking in during the early hours, picking up peroxide, tape, and liquid bandages. The Jeep also pointed the detectives back to the gas station stop at 4:20 in the morning. A receipt and security video became one of the key timestamps in their timeline. The phone records told their own story. All night she'd been calling and texting, checking in with one friend after another, then silence, a stretch where nothing came through. When her phone lit up again, it wasn't just a single call. There were more calls, more texts, even a quick couple of visits. Detectives saw the pattern and asked themselves, was she just passing time, or was she making sure that people could place her somewhere else? Back at the house, the crime scene techs were logging their own details. No forced entry and the house keys missing. Meanwhile, from the Jeep, the detectives had the receipts, the Walgreens bag, and a gray sweatshirt with a napkin stuffed in the pocket. Both spotted what looked like blood. Lab tests would later say whose. Piece by piece, the timeline was no longer just Noura's version of the events. It was receipts, cameras, and evidence stacking up against her. And by then, the detectives felt they weren't chasing a wide-open case anymore. The circle was closing in. In the days after, the detectives started digging through every piece they had. Some of it raised more questions than answers. There was the condom wrapper on the bedroom floor that didn't match the brand in the nightstand. The fingerprints were mostly smudges. The only clear ones belonged to someone no one can identify. The DNA from other people turned up on the bedding, and long blonde hairs pulled from Jennifer's hands. Nobody ever figured out whose they were. What did stand out was the blood. When the lab results came back, the evidence got heavier. Jennifer's blood was on the sneakers Noura wore that morning, and Noura's blood was on the paper towel stuffed in the sweatshirt pocket. And then there were the phone records. Mixed in with that late-night activity was a name that would come up again. Andrew Hammock, one of Noura's friends. Both the house landline and her cell showed the last outgoing calls going to him. By late September 2005, after the interviews and lab works, the state moved forward. Noura was arrested and charged with her mother's murder. It took almost 4 years for the case to go to trial. Noura went through multiple defense attorneys, and delays piled up before it was finally set for trial in early 2009. At the trial, the prosecution leaned on two things: access to the house and the timeline. There was no forced entry, and that broken pane, it lined up with the inside lock, a lock you couldn't reach from the outside. To the state, that said one thing: staging. Then, a long quiet stretch after 1 a.m., then the Walgreens, the gas at the all-in-one, and the blood on the shoes. The state told jurors that the calls and the visits after prolonged silence were not random. They were to paint alibis. The items from Walgreens, they said that lined up with treating a cut after an attack. The defense pushed back. No confession, no eyewitness, and no single piece of physical evidence tying Noura directly to the stabbing. They pointed to the gaps, other people's DNA, unknown prints, the long blonde hairs, and the CSI mistakes at the scene. At the closing, the lead prosecutor held up a sheet of paper and told the jury to think about what they hadn't heard. "You heard nothing," she said, a line aimed squarely at the fact that Noura hadn't testified in her own defense. The defense jumped on this right away, asking for a dismissal, saying it violated her Fifth Amendment rights. The judge denied it, and the case went to the jury. The verdict landed in the middle. Not first degree, but second degree murder. The sentence came down to just under 21 years, and under Tennessee law, she'd have to serve at least 85% of it. Not long after the trial, Noura filed an appeal. The first stop was the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals, but they upheld the conviction. Her lawyers pushed it higher, and in 2004, the Tennessee Supreme Court threw it out. They said the prosecutor's remark in closing crossed the line, and the state had hidden an additional statement from one of its key witnesses, Andrew Hammock. In that interview, he admitted that he was high on ecstasy the night of the murder and didn't even have his phone. It was in someone else's car. The detail could have been used to tear into his testimony to show that his memory and the timeline built around him couldn't be trusted. In May of 2015, instead of a new trial, Noura took what's called an Alford plea, where you don't admit guilt, but you accept the conviction to avoid the risk of something worse. The charge was dropped to voluntary manslaughter, and the deal was 15 years. On paper, she was immediately parole eligible. In reality, it took just over a year for the process to play out. By August of 2016, she was released, free after more than a decade behind bars. Years later, her name would surface again. In July of 2022, the police in Cadiz, Kentucky got a call about a suspicious person in a parking lot. When they arrived, they found Noura at her car with marijuana sitting in plain view. That led to a full search. The officer found cocaine, more marijuana, prescription pills in the wrong containers, drug paraphernalia, and they also confirmed that she was driving on a revoked license. Noura admitted that the drugs were hers and she was hit with a stack of charges. It was a very different case, far from Memphis, but it added another chapter to her story. Thank you for watching. If you want more cases in this format, give the video a like, it really helps the channel. I also want to hear your take. What makes sense and what doesn't, and where you land after hearing it all. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Also, did you find the small hidden Easter egg in the video? Be the first to comment exactly what it is, where it appears on screen, and the precise timestamp down to the second, and I'll pin your comment to the top. Finally, if you want more stories like this, consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, see you next time.